Today's share will be a very unusual share. I've never actually spoken in detail on this thing, but the time has come that we should be able to speak about it to some extent. And what is today's share? Well, for the last couple of months, I've been giving a share based on a certain premise. And that premise was the fact that we are in the Yemos HaMashiach. In other words, we are not waiting for the Yemos HaMashiach. We are actually in it. And the Mashiach himself, at least the first one, has already arrived. And I proved this point in essence by talking about the name of the person, which is Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. And today we are now in the sphere which commemorates the Avelis of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. But what I've said basically is simply that Rabbi Akiba was simply not a Tana, he was an actual Mashiach. But that Klal Yisrael was not Zocha. It was the intent of the Rebbeinu Shalom to bring down the old Mashiach to the world. Finally, whether Klal Yisrael is Zocha to it or not. And what we said that basically at that time, 2,000 years ago, Klal Yisrael was really not Zocha to it because of their sin as chinam, because the sin of unwarranted hatred, jealousy between Jews and so on, and the way they behaved to each other, as exemplified in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The Jews would not be Zocha to the Yemos HaMashiach in actuality. But God said that, they will be Zocha to the Yemos HaMashiach in potential. In other words, what we're going to do is we're changing the whole order of the world. And the first 4,000 years of the world was designed to get the people to be at least Zocha to the thing. But in the next 2,000 years, we will actually produce the Yemos HaMashiach itself, except that the Yemos HaMashiach will be in Golus. And I've tried to describe this and explain how the Yemos HaMashiach was being Golus. And the two ways that really point to this is that the Yemos HaMashiach, first of all, God confiscated the concept of Mamlechus Kohanim of the Jews. That even though the Torah says that Klal Yisrael is an Am Segula because it keeps the mitzvahs, it has a certain kedusha, and it's also a Mamlechus Kohanim because they will be the kind of the messenger to the world about the unity of the Rebbeinu Shalom and its absolute sovereignty of the world and the possibility of going to Olam Haba. But that the concept of Mamlechus Kohanim, a kingdom of priests, in which the Jews are, since they are the messengers of God, will be confiscated by them. Rather, it will be confiscated for them. It will be given to his brother, the brother of Yaakov Avinu, who was Esav. Esav would take over the role of Mamlechus Kohanim temporarily. So in other words, the Yemos HaMashiach would actually be in operation. It will be operational for the first time, except it will be a new form. The form of the Yemos HaMashiach would be in the form of a golus, of an exile. And in that position of an exile, Klal Yisrael would be, in a certain sense, bringing the Yemos HaMashiach. But the main reason why the Klal Yisrael is in the Yemos HaMashiach, how do we know this? Is because not only because in the Golus of Edom or the Golus of Rome or the Golus of what's called Christianity, but that they would also have the 50th gate, the light of the Mashiach itself. But that would be concealed in the Kabbalah. In other words, the light of Mashiach, which will future become publicized, would be hidden. It would be concealed. And it would be concealed in the light of the Kabbalah. And that was the fundamental task of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who we're going to commemorate soon in a couple of days, which will be Lag BaOmer. So right now, this year is extremely relevant. This year will be very relevant. because we're now in the sphere, which is the Avelis, the mourning that relates to the death of the students of Rabbi Akiba. And now we also understand why we are in mourning, because of his death. And that's not because we are memorializing or commemorating the death of Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. That's not why. There are many instances in the Jewish history where many more Jews died than just 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiba. But the reason and the significance of this is for a specific reason, because Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef was actually the Mashiach, and I did a lot of work showing this and so on. And because we lost the actual Mashiach himself, he actually appeared, and he was supposed to be the Mashiach. We lost the actual possibility of the Yemosa Mashiach, the days of the Mashiach, being an actual event, not concealed, but revealed. In the year 4000, Klal Yisrael was supposed to have the Yemosa Mashiach in a revealed form. Instead, they were not Zocha, so it was placed on them in a concealed form. And that concealment was the death of Rabbi Akiva, and the death of the 10 martyrs, and the death of the 24,000 students. And that's the real reason. That's the real reason why we have commemorate this thing in terms of an Avelis. We mourn the loss, not simply of Jews who are killed by Goyim, but we mourn the loss of the most important Jews of all, the actual Mashiach, who was supposed to be the Mashiach at that time, and his students. These 24,000 students were the students of the Mashiach, and as the students, they represented the chinuch that was supposed to come with the 50th gate of the Torah. Instead, we lost it finally, and instead we have the whole thing in a concealed form. Now, what I'd like to do today is in commemoration of the Avelis of Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef and the loss in a revealed form of the Yemosa Mashiach. I'd like to speak about something I've never really spoken about, and that's about the concept of the 50th gate. We know that the light of the Mashiach, the light in which he will bring the complete knowledge of God to the world, so that everyone in the world will be completely aware, almost as a sensation, of the ultimate sovereignty of the Bnei Shalom, of his yichud, and so on. So I think it's very important for us to have maybe some idea of what the Yemosa Mashiach will look like by revealing to some extent on what that light will look like. Now, there are two things that we have to say about that light, which are very strange. It's extremely strange. The first thing that it says about the 50th gate, which is the light which has never been revealed to the world yet, it's been hidden, it will be revealed by the Mashiach himself. And it will be the power of that light which will reveal finally to the world the existence and power of God. But the Torah tells us two things about that light which are very strange. The Torah says, O chodosh al tzion to'ir v'niske chulonu b'meheru la'oroi, that it is a new light. That's right. When it describes the light of the Mashiach, it says it's an Or Chodosh. It's a new light. What does that mean, a new light? It's a light which has never been revealed before to mankind, and therefore it has the quality of being new. And this is a very strange thing, because we thought that God revealed the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai, and that this is the light that we have. But we know that this is not true, because the light that God revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai was not the Torah that we have today, the 5 books of Moses. It is not that. It is really the light of the Mashiach. Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to get the 50th gate of the Torah in the form of a new light. But instead, because of the sin of the golden calf, because of what the Jewish people did at that time, God decided not to give that light, but he would allow the light to go down on the planet Earth, but in a completely disguised form. So Moshe Rabbeinu in the first tablets actually brought down the light of the Mashiach, which is completely different than the light that we have today. Where is this light? So what I said last time was this light was brought down on the second tablets, but it's concealed in the second tablets. In other words, the tablets that we have today, which is the Taryag Mitzvahs, and all the stories in the Torah itself contains inside that story, inside that narrative, it contains the light of Mashiach. Where? Well, it's completely hidden. And that's what it means that Moshe Rabbeinu broke the first tablets after he came down from the mountain and he saw that the Jewish people were actually commemorating the golden calf and so on. But in some manner or form, the light of the Mashiach, the 50th gate, which is considered the new light, is contained in the intrinsic essence of the Torah itself. But there is no one in the world that knows how to take it out. In other words, the light finally was brought down by Moshe Rabbeinu from the Shemayim to the Oretz, from heaven to earth. But when it was brought down to the earth, Moshe Rabbeinu broke the tablets, symbolically referring to the fact that these lights would not be operationally revealed. Nobody would be able to see it, but it would be with us. It would be with mankind. It would be with the Jewish people. And then the light, therefore, was hidden in the Torah that we have today. And that was given to us on Yom Kippur, which is the real day of mourning and repentance. Why is Yom Kippur chosen, the 10th day of Elul, as the day of what? As the day of kapora, of rehabilitation, of repentance? Because that was the actual day that God brought down the light itself and allowed it to be hidden in the Torah that we have today. So in a sense, it reveals to us a certain aspect of forgiveness and rehabilitation. Even though God is punishing the Jewish people because of the sin of the golden calf, as he has stated in the Torah, he is not punishing us in the sense that he is confiscating that light and taking it back. He is allowing Moshe Rabbeinu to reveal that light in a hidden form, and it's contained in the Torah that we have today. But what's unknown is how to take it out. You see it? That's what's contained. Now that light was known how to take out. Yes, it was actually revealed to mankind through the Tana, Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. He was the only man that knew actually how to pull out the information from the Torah that we have. And that's what it means in the Medrash, Dalud Nichne Sapardes. There are 4 Tanoim, 4 great sages that went into the garden. And the garden refers fundamentally to the light of Mashiach itself. And these 4 went in. 3 of them had some unfortunate occurred in the sense that they were not successful. But one of them, Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef, was successful. Like the Gemara says, Nichnatz b'shalom v'yotze b'shalom. He entered in peace and he exited in peace. So he succeeded in pulling the light of Mashiach, the actual light itself, which the Torah refers to as an Or Chodesh, a new light, from the Torah that we have today. How did he do that? Well, we don't know that. And that mystery and that secret was hidden to the end of time, until the time that the second Mashiach would come and complete the job in which Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef was supposed to do. Because the Messianic period was supposed to start with him. All we got was that we have the light of Mashiach in some tremendously hidden form. And that form is in the Torah itself, which we cannot understand. So the question is, why is this referred to as an Or Chodesh, as a new light? I mean, okay, it's hidden. It's a deeper form of light. But it doesn't say new light. The word is chodosh, new. So why should it be new? What does that mean? It's not new, because it's already, to some extent, known. We know that it appears in the Torah itself. We don't know how to get it out of the Torah that we have. But to say that it's a new light, the word new refers to some kind of deep, some deep mystery that we're not really aware of. So there's something to be said about this light, which is an Chodesh, when it will be finally revealed at the end of time by the Mashiach himself. Another Mashiach ben Yosef will appear to reveal that light. That light will be literally a new light. When Klal Yisrael looks at it, they will be shocked. What does that mean, shocked? They will not know Torah on a deeper level. That's not what it's referring to. But they will know the Torah on a new level, on a level which has never been discussed before and never been revealed before. It will actually be, when you look at it, it will almost feel like it was a new Torah that was never given before. You know what I mean? It will be like a new revelation that Klal Yisrael never had, and they will not even recognize it. So, Chodesh means a new light. It means the kind of Torah that is so shocking and so amazing that it will be considered almost as if it's a new revelation. That's what the word new means. You know, it doesn't say it's an omok, it's a deeper light. It does not say that the 50th gate will be a deeper light. It says it will be a new light. So it has the implication that there will be something shocking about it, something that's so extraordinary it has never really been seen before. That seems to be the implication. But yet there's also another pasuk that refers to it, and this is very strange, because when we look at the Torah itself as we have it, fundamentally like where it exists in the yeshiva world and the world of the Batei Midrashos over the whole world, what is the Torah that we have now? You know? And what does the Torah itself think about that Torah that we have now? That's a curious question, and so on. It is the light of Torah? Yes. It's clearly the light of Torah, and so on. But obviously there's something about it which is completely different than the light of the 50th gate. Why do I say this? Because there's a pasuk in the Torah that says the following. The pasuk in the Torah says, "B'machshakim hoshivani Hashem." In darkness, God placed it. Kimesei olam. It exists in the cemetery with the dead people. And what Chazal say, this refers to the Torah that we have. That's right. The Torah that we have for the last 2,000 years, which is fundamentally the Gemara, the Talmud, Shas, you know, Bavli, Talmud, Yishalmi, which is a complete Torah that was given to us. In addition, we have the Mishnah and the Sefters, and we have many, many Surim which are commenting on these things. So what we have is a real Torah, right? We have Shas in Bavli and Shami, and we have all the commentaries and the Mishnah and so on. And this is what the Torah is. This is what the Torah that is learned in the whole yeshivish world. In every Beis Medrash, for the last 2,000 years, what they learned was these Torah, the Torah of Talmud Bavli, the Torah of Talmud Yerushalmi, the Torah of the Mishnah, the Sefta, and the Agarata. This is the Torah that we have. And we assume that this is like the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down. But it's called the Torah Shabbat Peh, because the Torah was given in a text, in a written form, called the Torah Shabbat, and the Torah was also given in an oral form, where God dictated to Moshe Rabbeinu directly through Nevuah what the commentary on the Taryag Mitzvahs are, and so on. So therefore, we assume that the Gemara and Shas is the Torah Shabbat Peh. This is what God gave out. Yet, when we see the pasuk, which the Torah says us, "B'machshakim hoshivani Hashem," the Torah is referring to this Torah as the Torah that exists in a cemetery. That's what it means. It says, Chazal say, what is this Torah in darkness? You know what the Chazal say? Chazal say, Zu Talmud Bavli. That's right. It's shocking. Talmud Bavli is referring to itself as what? It's describing the status of what it is. It says, this Torah, which now will become the central limud for the next 2,000 years of Klal Yisrael, through the different kufas of the Goinim, the Rishonim, the Acharonim, this Torah which we are intensely preoccupied with, what is it? It's a Torah in total darkness. It's a Torah compared to a cemetery. It's like it's like dead people learning the concepts of Torah. What? This is how Chazal themselves refer to their own Gilui, their own revelations, that they spend so much time revealing the different categories and the different conflicts in Halacha in terms of Shas and so on. What is Chazal saying? This is like the Torah that's learned in a cemetery by dead people? Because it says, the Torah was placed in darkness, like the Torah that's learned by dead people. So this is shocking. This is something we've never heard before. I don't know how many people know about this pasuk and so on. But that's exactly what they say. Zu Talmud Bavli. That the reference to the Torah from this pasuk is referring to Talmud Bavli, our Torah, that which we are about to reveal to the world. So not only does the Torah say it's an Chodosh, it's a new light, and that seems to be complementary. It's a light that's so incredible that it has never been revealed before. Okay, this seems to be telling me the high quality of this limud, of this Torah. But at the same time, it calls it a no Chodesh, a new Torah. It calls it b'machshachem hoshivani Hashem. That is the Torah k'mei se'olam. It's a dead Torah. Wait a minute. This is absolutely mind-boggling. You mean the Torah that's been learned by Klal Yisrael through all the Goinim and the Rishonim and the Acharonim, all that Torah is like a Torah which is learned by dead people? This makes no sense whatsoever. And therefore, this begs an explanation. What does that mean? Because it's not, you have to understand, I'm not saying this. I am not saying such a thing that the Torah is in darkness like it's in a cemetery. I never said this. Chazal are saying this. The sages themselves, the Tanoim, are referring by this term to the Talmud Bavli. In fact, that's what they say. Zu Talmud Bavli. Now, if I ask anyone what this probably means, I think they would tell me, well, what this probably means that there's a Torah on the 50th gate, the Torah, all of Mashiach, which in that all he will be able to convince the whole world of the existence of God, yes, but it's simply deeper. It's a deeper Torah, and that's what they mean. But that doesn't fit. The difference between one level of knowledge and another level of knowledge, it's true that it's a difference in depth. One is on a much deeper level. But you don't call this K'mei Se'olam. Come on. You don't refer to a Torah which is deeper as a live Torah and a Torah which is less deep as a dead Torah. It doesn't make sense. That's not the term that's used. But that's what Chazal are referring to. That the Torah that we have is the dead Torah. It's like a Torah that's learned by dead people. So I've never seen anyone actually ask this question, even answer this question. But in this year and perhaps the next year also, I want to talk about what I think Chazal mean and what I think they're saying when they say this, to show some kind of truth to what they're saying. Now, it's something very important that I have to say. Chas v'sholom, I am not saying that the Torah that we have today, which is Talmud Bavli, should not be learned. Chas v'shalom. This is the Torah that we possess today. This is our Mesorah. This is our tradition. And we are told that this is the Torah of Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. This is the Torah that comes from Har Sinai. So we zicha have to learn this. We have to give it the full kavod as if it's Torah. We must do this. But yet at the same time, it's incumbent upon us to examine what is the Torah talking about. What are Chazal saying when they say such a thing? They're not saying not to learn this Torah, but they're saying, no, this is the Torah that's given to you to learn. In other words, this is the Torah that God intended for you to learn in the next 2,000 years. God intended the Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral law, to be written down first as a Mishnah, and then to be written down then finally as a Gemara, and then to be written down as commentaries on what all this means. Clearly this is what God intended, and therefore this is the Torah that God wants us to learn. But what is going on here? Why would God want us to learn this kind of Torah? Why would he give us a Torah that he refers to as the Torah of dead people? What does that mean? So this is a very deep mystery which has never been faced. I've never seen any reference to this question. But we have to understand what this is. Why? Because we are facing the probable eventuality of the arrival of Mashiach. It is moments away, in a certain sense. The Vilna Gaon says it's like Klal Yisrael should be saying tefillos and brachos, and should be singing, and should be saying they should be putting on their clothes that they wear for Shabbos. Why? Because the Vilna Gaon says certain things, that this is the time of the Mashiach himself. So we are about to greet him, and we are about to greet his light. So what does this mean? What kind of light is this? And what does this mean that the references are to such a lower level of Torah that we have? And it is absolutely critical to at least put forth some explanation of what it is. So therefore, that's what I'm going to do in this year. So it's going to be a very strange year. It's probably going to be a year that has probably never been given, and you will never hear again. Because I'm going to make an attempt to give some kind of understanding of what that is. So I'm going to do it in a series of steps. I'm going to begin doing it in a series of steps where I talk about different aspects of the 50th gate. Now, the truth of the matter is, I cannot really point to a source for this information, although I have different sources that kind of refer to it. The first idea is the concept that what do we do in the base of meditation when we learn Torah? In the entire, all the yeshivas in the world, they all do fundamentally the same thing. Fundamentally, what they learn is halacha. That's right. They learn the laws of the Taryag mitzvahs, the details of the Taryag mitzvahs. That's called halacha, and so on. But what does it mean, halacha? We have to understand what is the actual nature of halacha. Because there are two possibilities. The one possibility, a halacha is like a law, like a secular law, like the law of the federal government or the state government and so on. And what is that? That's a law that fundamentally says that if you do a certain action, there will be a certain consequence. For example, if you steal something, the consequence will be to have to pay it back in a certain way, or else you will have to go to jail. So the halacha is a law that has a kind of a causal connection. The action that you do will cause a certain consequence of what will happen to you. That's the concept of a convention. But who decides this convention? Who decides what you have to do and what will happen to you? And the answer is mankind. So therefore, it's a convention. It's something that was agreed upon by mankind itself. Every government has laws, and these laws are fundamentally determined by the state of government itself. Different governments have different laws, but fundamentally there is a certain level of morality which they should all be equal on, and unfortunately they're not, but they should all be equal on. So let's talk about the U.S. government. The U.S. government has a code of law. You know, it itemizes certain specific activities in what you do, which are considered prohibited. It says that you cannot do certain things. You cannot steal, you cannot defraud a person, and so on and so forth, in different ways. Surely you cannot kill a person. These are laws in the code of jurisprudence. Not only that, the law says what will happen to you. You will be charged in a court of law, and if the case is proven that you did the thing that was said of you, then you will get a certain consequence. And the law dictates what that consequence is. In the case of homicide, if you are convicted of homicide, you are killed by the state. If it's a question of robbery, maybe you'll go to jail for a certain amount of time. But just as the books of law of these halachas from the secular government are conventions, so are the consequences conventions. And all of it is the product of the human mind in terms of what you can't do and what will happen to you if you do it. But these are conventional laws. What does this mean? That the cause and effect relationship between the behavior and the consequences of the behavior are dictated by man. Not only is the law contrived by man, not only does mankind write the laws upon their agreement together, but they are the causal agent between the doing the deed, between the doing the prohibition, and what's going to happen to you. In other words, for example, if a person steals a certain item, now if he is caught by the police, and then he is put on trial and judged that he was a thief, then the government perforce puts the two together, the law and the consequence, and is the executive agent that does this. But what happens if the person is never caught? In other words, if a person steals an item and he's never caught, so therefore, is there really a consequence? Well, there's a consequence for that action on the books, but there is no consequence for the person in terms of his personal experience. He will never go to jail. Why? Because they will never catch him, or they will be unable to prove that he is the one that did it. So therefore, the causal connection between the doing of the deed and the consequence, which is stated about what will happen, is only possible. It's an option. It should happen, but it can only happen on condition. So it's therefore said to be conditional. The causal connection between these two parts of the event of the prohibition and the event of the consequence, are fundamentally a causal connection which is needs mankind to be in the executive role. But if the person is never caught, nothing will ever happen to him. Nothing. And the only damage that will be done is the object that he stole, but he will never be caught. This is what the laws are as far as mankind is concerned. This is what it means, the legal system and lawyers and judges and so on. They are the executive agents of the legal system, which they have created. So the whole thing is done by convention, in other words, by agreement among peoples in terms of what you cannot do, what you can and cannot do, and what happens if you do it. But there's another type of law, which is not conventional, and that's called natural law. And what does that mean? Well, that's not a law that's constructed by mankind. That's a law which is constructed by God. In other words, an example of that law is gravity. it says that if you are an object with a certain mass, that you will attract another object with a certain mass by a certain force that exists between the two of you called gravity. So gravity is also called a law, but it's a natural law. It's not constructed, it's a law as part of the universe. It is a physical law. It's a law that manifests itself as not a convention, but an actual principle which exists in the universe. So the law says that every mass will attract every other mass with a certain force called gravity. Now, why is that? Well, that's how God created the world. Giving the law of gravity as a force. Is there a causal connection in gravity? Yes. Because gravity is constructed exactly like a law. It says that if certain conditions exist, certain consequences will exist. In other words, if you are a mass and you have a body, let's say, containing a mass, you will definitely attract another body containing mass to you that will be proportional to the amount of mass, and it will be inversely proportional to the distance between the two of you. That's the consequence. In other words, having mass as in your body, being an object with mass, right, is a certain operation. But it's an operation which the consequence is you will automatically attract and be attracted to every other body that has a mass. So that's called the law of gravity, and it's called the natural law. Why? Because it exists on its own. It is just simply physics. It's a part of the universe that behaves that way. Who is obviously the executive of that law? The executive of that law? God. When God created the law of gravity, he created the conditions which will make it possible where every object in the universe will attract every other object in the universe. So therefore, planets attract moons. Planets attract planets. Stars attract planets. The whole universe constructed from moons and planets and stars and galaxies all submit to the law of gravity. And this natural law is executed by God through the laws of physics. So we see something interesting. There are two types of laws. There are laws which are created by man himself in terms of trying to dictate a certain appropriate form of behavior, and that there are laws and these are called conventional laws, and that's the nature of the laws that we say in the legal system. And there's another type of law, which is called the natural law, which exists and determines the behavior of the universe, of objects in the universe, of physics. And the execution of these laws, the executive of these laws, is God. Obviously, these are two different systems of laws. Now, the question is the concept of halacha. Like it says, for example, Shabbos. You're supposed to observe the laws of Shabbos, which fundamentally include behavior patterns which you are not allowed to do. You know, there are prohibitive actions that you're not allowed to take. Now, what is the halacha? That's the halacha. The halacha of Shabbos, for example, is that you are not allowed to do certain actions. These actions are called malachos. Now, what's the consequence? The consequence of this behavioral prohibition is the concept that you can be obligated to death penalty in certain cases. You know what I mean? Or you can be obligated to korban under other circumstances. So it's the same kind of thing. The laws of the secular laws apply to people's behavior. The natural laws applies to the actions that are taken by non-living things, the universe. But the laws of the Torah are similar to which group? Is it similar to the laws that have to do with the way people have to behave? Or is it similar to the laws that govern how the universe acts? Well, when we look at the Taryag mitzvahs, what are the Taryag mitzvahs? The Taryag mitzvahs are behavioral imperatives. They tell people what to do and what not to do. In other words, they refer to the actions of people. But at the same time, therefore, they are very similar to conventional laws. But there's a tremendous difference between the laws of the Torah, of the Taryag mitzvahs, and the laws of secular humans. Because the laws of secular humans could happen or don't happen. It all depends, because the one who brings the cause and effect relationship between the action and the consequence is man himself. And if he's able to do something, he can execute the causal connection. But if the conditions don't exist and he cannot prove it, or he cannot find the person who did it, he can't do a thing. But that's not the same thing as natural law. In other words, it doesn't require the execution of a human being. It just happens because it's part of the behavior of the universe. So therefore, if a person goes on a roof and he jumps off the roof, the law of gravity says he will fall. In other words, he will go down to the ground and kill himself. Now the question is, who executed that law? Just because the man jumped off the roof, why does he have to fall to the ground and die? Who does that? Who connects the action with the consequence? And the answer is God. In other words, nothing visible. You cannot see who connects it, but it's an actual fact. Gravity is a law. It's a law that if you do a certain thing, something definitely, certainly, assuredly will happen. You will fall down from the roof and you will go all the way down until you hit the ground, and possibly you will die. So therefore we see two types of laws. So the question is this: what are the laws of the Torah? Are the laws of the Torah, the laws of the Taryag mitzvahs, similar to conventional law, or they are similar to natural law? That's a very big problem. And the answer is they are similar to natural law. In other words, even though the laws of the Torah were expressed in human terms because it refers to behaviors that people do, the consequences must ensue. In other words, if you are Mechala Shabbos, you do a malacha, a prohibitive action on Shabbos, you are definitely, there comes on you, on your soul, a death-like edict. And you must be killed. Well, let's say, for example, no one sees the person being Mechala Shabbos. And therefore, or there's no bezdin. There's no bezdin that can do that. So the person will not die. Yes, that's true. He will not die by the hands of man, but he will die by the hands of God. In other words, God does not rely on human beings to be the causal connection between the deed and between the consequence. He is ultimately, when somebody steals something and he's never caught, so you can say, well, what's the consequence? You're not allowed to steal. It says, lo signoiv, you're not supposed to steal. But is this lo signoiv, thou shalt not steal, similar to the law of society, conventional law, so that if he's not caught, nothing will happen to him? Or is it similar to a natural law? In other words, even though he's not caught, and the item is never returned, but there is a consequence. What? Where? Where is that consequence? It lies in his soul. His soul will register a mum. It would register a certain defect in the soul itself, which is an actual record of the deed he did. In other words, everything you do is recorded on your soul. It has nothing to do with if you're caught or not. It has nothing to do if you're found guilty in a court of law. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the truth of the deed. If you do something which is prohibited in the Torah, or if you do something which is permitted in the Torah, these actions are recorded in your soul, and your spiritual status, your spiritual condition actually reflects what you did or didn't do. It's in your soul. And after you pass away, something will be seen. When a person looks at the soul of a thief, he can actually see the act of theft that man performed. It's registered, it's recorded, it's written on the soul itself. And even so, something may happen to him in his life. In other words, he suddenly goes into a business and he loses all his money, or rather, he is suddenly mugged. He's walking down the street at night and suddenly he's mugged. And he says to himself, why was I mugged? So it looks like a random event, but it is not random. There is no such thing as a random event in the world. Every event in the world is done by God. So God is having him mugged. Why? Perhaps because he stole something and was never found out. He never returned the item. So in other words, God is the ultimate judge and the ultimate executive in terms of the causal connection, in terms of halachas, taryag mitzvahs. So the amazing chiddush is that the taryag mitzvahs and the laws of the taryag mitzvahs are not conventional, even though they are behavioral descriptions of what a person can and cannot do. In that way, they are similar to conventional laws, but they are natural laws. The halacha of lo signev is just as valid and just as powerful as the natural law of gravity. As far as the truth of that, they are both on the same level. Just like there's a law of gravity which will determine that if you oppose the law of gravity and you jump off the roof, you will die or you will be hurt. So there's also a law that if you steal and you are forbidden to steal in those circumstances, you will be punished. You will be punished either in your life by certain things that God will do to you, and that these are not random events, or you will be punished after death in Gehenna. But there is a consequence that will and must happen. So we see this in tremendous contradiction. Even though the halachas of the Torah, which are really nothing more than behavioral imperatives of how a person should act, even though they resemble secular law, they are totally different from secular law because they have nothing to do with the concept of man being the intermediary between the deed and the consequence. They are considered with the same power and validity as natural law. Something will happen after he lays on past and after he dies, but you will see a record of that. In other words, in Torah law, for example, I'll give you another example. If a person buys an object, if a person goes into a store and he buys something, okay, and then he goes out and somebody says to him, he says, I own this object, and the other person who sees him says to him, well, how do I know you own the object? In other words, is the ownership of an object inherent in the object? And the answer is no. When you go into a store and you buy an object and you walk out, there is nothing inherent in that object that says that you are the owner. In order to prove that you are the owner, you have to have a record of sale or a contract or something, or you have to have a deed. A person has to prove that he owns an object. How? By preferring a record of the sale. But in the case of kinyonim, when the Torah says that in order for you to own something, you have to make a kinyan, which is a certain operation which you perform, that what? It doesn't indicate that you own the object, but it creates the status of ownership. That's right. Once you make a kinyan on an object, that kinyan then becomes a record in the object itself. In other words, even though that cannot be detected on any level, we cannot see who owns what, because we don't see any effect that ownership has on an object that we bought. But the Torah says that effect happens. And somebody who's spiritual enough can actually look at an object and he can see who owns that object. So therefore, everything we do and everything that we buy or own is somehow recorded spiritually on the things themselves. So there's a record system of all of this on the soul of man. You can look at a person's soul and you can see what he owns and what he doesn't own. It's It's literally, it's a presence, it's a spiritual presence on him. So therefore we see not only do the actions that he does, which is permitted or unpermitted, record on his soul, but even the object that he owns is recorded on his soul. So that every aspect of human behavior in some way leaves an imprint. It leaves a record that this thing happened and that he owns the object. That's why we say that halachas, even though they have the form of behavioral imperatives, they refer to people's behaviors and they refer to people's actions. They are like natural law because a record is left. Someone with a high enough spiritual level can actually see that on the person who did this. So therefore, halachas, even though we say that they are behavioral imperatives, they are human actions, they are like natural law. They are events like those that occur in natural law. And therefore, they have a certain title. And that title is called a phenomena. What is a phenomena? What's the definition of a phenomena? A phenomena is an action. It's an event. It refers to something that happened. Happened where? Something that happened in reality. In other words, there's an actual record, there's an actual imprint in reality that such a thing occurred. And such an event is called a phenomena. This is different than the legal system of secular governments. Because the legal system of secular governments is not a phenomena. A certain action happened, it's true, but there is no causal connection between the action and the actual consequence. There's only agreed upon convention according to the laws on the books. But if there's no record of that at all, nothing happened. But that's not true of halachas. That even though halachas are simply human activities and look like they are conditional based on whether you have proof or not, you always have proof. Technically speaking, everything that a person does and everything that he relates to is connected on some level spiritually to his existence, to his essence, to his soul, and you cannot get away from that. And that's how God judges mankind after he sins. God does not need a proof that the person did something. The person himself is the proof. Because the phenomena of whatever he did, the action of whatever he did, the event of whatever he did is actually recorded in the person himself. And he becomes a manifestation of the action in some way. In other words, a thief looks like a thief. He becomes a thief in actuality. His reality, his spiritual reality, and his life become an actual manifestation of his ill deeds. So therefore we see that all events that happen to people are not events that God decides. They are events that are already imprinted in the very essence, in the very nature of the person. Every time you do a sin of a detayag mitzvah, you actually perform an action which is recorded in reality. Hence that action is not called a convention, it's called a phenomena. It's like the phenomena of physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, and so on. It has the same validity as a scientific event. Now, I think a lot of people realize this, but people don't think of it in those terms. We tend to think of the halachas of the Tayyag mitzvahs as similar to the conventional laws of mankind. But they are absolutely different, completely different. So that means something very important. The concept of how it's to be analyzed. Do you study laws that are written by man? In other words, when you want to study to become a lawyer, and you want to study these laws that are written by man, how do you study halachas? So therefore, if the halachas are real events that actually happened, does that in some way determine how you should study, what the method of analysis? Of course. Because we study phenomena like scientists do. Scientists study phenomena how? They observe the event. They measure the event. They see exactly what constitutes the properties of the event. And once they do that, they try and do something else, which is what? They try to explain the event. They try and see this event is caused by what? By another event. So therefore, they are always seeking to find the causal relationship between events. In other words, because of this, because the event that you have mass, you have a certain mass, that event of having mass automatically creates a force called gravity, which is a force of attraction. That's a law of physics. But it's a connection between two events, the events of mass and the event of distance. Determine the consequence, which is the amount of force that will be exhibited by you as you attract another object. So therefore, how do scientists study events? Well, because scientists don't know the events before, they have to do experiments and they have to observe natural law. In other words, if you don't observe the action of two things attracting, you'll never know about the law of gravity. Newton, the genius of Newton is that Newton was able to put together three events that on the surface don't look like it's an event. The fact that an object falls, like for an apple falls from a tree. So he said to himself, when Isaac Newton was under a tree, he said, why is this apple, now that it's disconnected from the tree, why is it falling? Because falling is a consequence, it's a phenomena of attraction. So he said to himself, why is it moving? In other words, if it's disconnected the tree, it just simply remain disconnected and it just stay in the same place. But why does it fall to the ground? Nobody knew, but they were observing an event that occurs in nature. There's another event that occurs in nature, tides. We all see oceans move. When we look at the ocean, when we look at bodies of water, we see that the body of water is not at rest. Well, if you're in a bathtub, when you have filled the bathtub with water, does the water move? No, it's at rest. It's immobile. So why aren't the oceans immobile? In other words, you should simply have water in the oceans and they should be at rest. They should not be moving. So why do the oceans move? Why does the water continuously move in one direction or another direction? Or the concept of a current. What does it mean that water moves? What's causing it to move? In order for something to move, you have to push it or pull it. So what is causing the water to move in the oceans? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. We know that the water in the oceans of the world are constantly moving, and they're producing what's called, in our language, tides. That's why there are different tides, high tide and low tide. Because at high tide, the water is higher. At low tide, because of the movement, the water is lower. But what's causing this motion? Nobody knew. And then finally, when Newton looked at the sky and he saw the moon, he saw that the moon continues to revolve around the earth. Okay, so the earth is moving, but it's moving in a certain vector, in a certain direction, in a certain way. It's moving in a circle around the planet Earth. And he said to himself, why is it moving? What causes the moon to move? It should be stationary. You know, you have the planet Earth and you have the moon. And that's it. It's stationary. It's staying. Well, that's what he saw. You see it. So he asked the question, why is this happening? He didn't know the answer. But suddenly he had a brilliant hop. He said, wait a minute. Maybe all these three motions, an apple falling from a tree, oceans of water moving, and the moon moving around the planet Earth, or the planet Earth moving around the sun, maybe all of these actions are not different, separate types of phenomena. Maybe these are events which are all related to one explanation. And he said, this explanation is gravity. In other words, if you have two objects, both with mass, an apple, the planet Earth, water, and the moon, These are all objects and they all have a mass. But there's something about their mass that when their masses are placed next to each other or near each other, the masses cause an attraction between the objects. Wow, what a hop. And therefore, Newton discovered the law of gravity, not simply as a law, the natural law which explains the motion of an apple, or the motion of the tides, or the motion of the planets and the moons, but as an action that refers to all objects in the world. Anything that has a mass is subject to the law of the force of gravity. And then he described this law mathematically, by a certain formula, F equals mm over d square times g. Well, that's for those people who know the law. But that's what he did. So that's the concept of a natural law. In other words, it's the attempt to understand, why does this happen? And it's an attempt to explain why it happens. Well, what does it mean to explain an event? To explain an event is to connect it to another event in a causal way. If I say that this event happens, why? Because there's another event that also happens that determines this event. So I've established a causal connection, and that's referred to as an explanation. So the goal of a scientist is to explain why things happen based on the events which are causal, because there are certain things that happen in one way, they somehow influence the possibility of the causes that affect another thing. So that's the way you study natural law. You attempt to explain it. The function of science as a chokhmah is the attempt to always explain natural law. How? By relating two events together in a causal way. So what science does is first discover the natural law. It first determines what's happening, what is the event, how is it measured, and so on. And then after discovering what the event is, it looks for another event which somehow can explain, which relates to the first event in a causal way. And it says that. Now, if you ask the scientists, well, why are these two events causal? It is, why does the existence of one event cause the existence of the other event? Not only that, it not only causes the existence of the other event, but it causes the amount of other event. But in other words, depending on the mass, depending how substantive an object is, that will determine the amount of gravity. That's right. So the bigger the mass, the greater the attraction force. So therefore, the Earth, which is much bigger than the Moon, has a much greater force of attraction to the Moon than the Moon has to the Earth. But they both have a force of attraction to each other. But one has a greater force because it has a greater mass. Now, if you ask the scientists, well, why does it determine on mass? Why is it a variable? Why does it depend? Why does gravity, the force of gravity, depend on how big and how massive the object is? He will fundamentally tell you, I don't know. I can't answer the question. I can only relate which two events are causally related, but I truly don't understand the nature of the causal. But when he does more research later on, he's able to then relate the event to other causes, and he begins to get an idea of why it happens, which I'm not going to go into, and so on. So this is science. Science is a study of phenomena. It's a study of natural laws that must happen. If there's an event, if there's a deed, then there must be a consequence. And it has nothing to do with the interference of mankind. Whether there exists a single person on the planet Earth, or there does not exist anyone on the planet Earth, the law of gravity holds. An object of one mass will always attract an object of another mass, so that they will tend to move towards each other. Natural laws exist by themselves, and they're explained through the association of two causal. They explain the association in a causal way. And this is what science is. Now, this is not really a way the person is supposed to study halachas. He doesn't study halachas this way. Because secular law is studied in terms of what is the deed and what is the consequence if the conditions exist that force the deed, that the conditions exist where you can prove it. In other words, the study of conventional law, which is our legal system, is a completely different type of analytical process than the study of science and the study of natural law. But wait a minute. What I said before was a tremendous thing. What did I say? Our halachas of the Taryag mitzvahs, are these conventional laws written by man and discovered by man? Or these Taryag mitzvahs discovered or created by God? God is the one who said that what? That if I'm a Challah Shabbos, I go against Shabbos, I have a certain consequence which will eventually come to me. God is the ultimate execution of the laws. And God either do it by telling mankind, you have to make a bezin and you have to perform the laws, or else God will do it himself without the intermediation of mankind. Why? Because the Taryag mitzvahs are natural laws. They are the laws of the universe. What universe? They are the laws of the spiritual universe. So we see an amazing thing. What's the difference between spirituality and physicality? Only in the type and the substance. Physical reality is composed of a substance which is detectable from your five senses. What you see, hear, taste, smell, touch. And these five senses can detect a physical object. If your five senses cannot detect a physical object at all, it's beyond, let's say, for example, like X-rays or something like that, or cosmic rays, then you say, well, it's not within the realm of physicality. Or it is in the realm of physicality, but we have not been able to discover how to detect it. But there are certain events that take place, phenomena, that relate to the Taryag mitzvahs. And these mitzvahs, the Taryag mitzvahs, of whether you do them or not, or if you own an object or not, are not possible to detect from a physical standpoint. And therefore, what is that? Where does that exist? Where do those laws, which are natural also, where do they exist? They exist in the world of ruchnius, in the world of spirituality. So now we understand the difference between the physical and the spiritual. Both of these things are natural law. Even though the Taryag mitzvahs relates to human behavior, it is still a natural law. And therefore it is subject to the analysis of a natural law. And where is it manifest? Where are these laws of Shabbos? The law of Shabbos, the event called Chilul Shabbos, where does it happen? In other words, if a person is Mechalel Shabbos behester, he only does it alone. No one sees him. How can you prove that he was Mechalel Shabbos? You can't. But since the behavior of Chilul Shabbos is a law, is a natural phenomenal event that occurs in the spiritual universe, it has spiritual undertaking. It can be detected in a spiritual sense. So therefore, every malach that sees such a neshama, and every neshama that sees such a neshama, can see it. He can see on the neshama itself that it was participated in Chilul Shabbos, because it's a natural law. So what does this tell me about how to study halachas? The real way to study halachas? Well, if halachas are really part of natural law, then they have to be studied in a similar way to the way man studies natural law. He has to understand its parameters, its properties, and in some way, and define these properties, and try and find the causal relationship with other events. In other words, a person is Mechalel Shabbos, let's say. Why does he have Chiyuv Misa? Why? We don't understand this. So we say it's Gzeir Zakosov. But the explanation of this is not Gzeir Zakosov. There's a reason for this. There's a reason why Geneva, or the reason why if you eat Chometz on Pesach, you commit a sin. And that sin is a natural law. It's something which appears on your neshama. Why? We don't know. In other words, we fail to understand the Taryag mitzvahs as a series of phenomena, as a series of natural laws. But that's what they are, because God is behind both. Just like God is behind the law of gravity, God is behind the law of Chilul Shabbos, behind the law of Chametz of Pesach, and so on and so forth. Every one of the Taryag mitzvahs is not a convention. It is not something agreed on by people. It's not a ritual. It's not a ceremony. A ritual is an event performed by people, but they make up the event. A ceremony is performed by people, but they determine the ceremony. And those ceremonies and rituals, all of these things are the basis of conventions. They have nothing to do with spirituality. But the Taryag mitzvahs are not rituals. They are not ceremonies. Right? So what are they? They are natural laws. They are a law as natural as gravity, as electromagnetism, as electricity, as nuclear fusion. They have the same quality of their reality as the laws of physics and all the laws of biology and chemistry. So this implies that the method of analysis, if you want to understand the mitzvahs, you have to ask a different series of questions. And is it possible to answer? Yes. God has not given us the answer overtly, but he has provided us a way to derive the answers. And the answer to these questions of why are the Taryag mitzvahs natural law? What are the causal relationship between what type of events? The answer to this is in the Nun Sha'arei Bina. That's what it means, the 50th gate. When you know the 50th gate of Torah, you will actually understand why Shabbos is, what do you call it, Chiyuv Misa. You will understand why Chometz is not allowed. I mean, under normal considerations, why shouldn't a person be able to eat Chometz on Pesach? It's made out of dough, it's made out of flour, so it's like bread. So the bread doesn't bake long enough. So what? What does this have to do with my eating it? Can I digest matzah? Of course. You can digest matzah as well as you can digest bread. So why is one allowed and one not allowed? Because God said so. But what does it mean that God said so? It means that it is a natural law that somehow the operation of that mitzvah is inherent in reality. There's a reality separate from mankind that discusses and it has the content of what's the explanation of this event. We don't know what it is, but it has an explanation. And this explanation is contained in the Nun Sha'arei Bina. When the Nun Sha'arei Bina, the 50th gate, is revealed by the Mashiach, he will also reveal the reason for it, what causes it, what explains it. Whereas now the Torah is divided between Mishpatim and Chukim. Mishpatim are mitzvahs that we can understand the reason. At least we think we can. So the mitzvah of tzedakah obviously is the reason. Tzedakah is given because a person is poor and needs to survive. So he's part of your species and you have to work it out with him. You have to try and help support him. So we think we understand the mitzvah of tzedakah. But what's the mitzvah of, what do you call it, of certain treifas? You know what I mean? Certain things you're not allowed to eat, like Chametz for Pesach. What's the mitzvah of that? What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with eating? Nothing. So what is the power of the mitzvah of Chametz for Pesach and matzah? What is the meaning of this? You know, this is a physical event that seems to have no foundation, and there's no way to detect the explanation of this thing. This is called a choik. You see it? There's no real explanation given because we do not understand the causation of that. We don't understand what it's attached to, what it's really attached to that explains its operation. Shatnez. Why can't you wear two different types of materials together? You know what I mean? Why? So what? We don't know. So there are many things that are chukim that have no explanation. But it doesn't mean that there is no explanation. Even the Torah Duma had an explanation, but we don't know it. But it's what I'm saying, but the analysis of the activity is a phenomena, just like gravity is a phenomena. Therefore, it has an explanation that's capable of being given to it. How? By the 50th gate. So finally, we understand one aspect of what we mean by the 50th gate. The 50th gate would treat halachas, the taryag mitzvahs, as phenomena, and will give you a total or perfect understanding of why God is doing it. Now, this explanation can exist only in the spiritual world or not. We don't know. But when the Mashiach comes, he will be able to tell you exactly why this thing happens. And you will finally understand the whole inyan of Chametz and Matzah and Pesach. This is part of the realm of the 50th gate. And it's an Or Chodesh. It's an Or Chodesh. It's a new way of understanding something that has never been given to us. It's never been told to us why. So therefore it is a new way. It's a whole new way of seeing the taryag mitzvahs. No longer will we have to study about what is the mitzvah. But now we can study why is the mitzvah. What is the causal connection between association variables that determine that the mitzvah manifests itself in this way? We will finally have that ability. So this is the first shir that I want to give in terms of the Nun Sharabina. It's a shir which is based on the concept of that the halachas, the taryag mitzvahs, are phenomena. They are not laws, conventional laws of mankind. And that the correct way to study it is like the study of all phenomena. And that study is really the study of causal connections. Because of one fact, there is this another fact. Facts are related and they're causal. And some way the learning of Torah itself will completely change. We will not be bothered with something, what happens. We will no longer be concerned with the details of exactly what happens. We will actually get down to the level to understand why the thing happens and on what level and what the spiritual universe is in a completely different way. Next time I'm going to explain the second event, the second thing of the concept of the Nun Sharabina. And I will discuss the different possibilities in all the ways. So this is what the shiur is about. Okay.
Well, Rabbi, question.
Any questions?
Well, how will this new method of analysis apply to Rabbanan? We spend so much time learning about Rabbanan legislation, so to speak.
Good, very good question. You're asking questions not only on the devices, the laws, the taryag mitzvahs in the Torah. What about the Rabbanans? Right, very good question. What about that? What are the Rabbanans? Are they conventional laws or are they natural laws? That's the real question. What are they? So what do you think they are?
That the Rabbanim were mechaven to what the natural law really was and extended it out.
But how do you know this? How do you know that the Rabbanan are natural law?
Because the Torah of the Deraisa tells us to follow the Rabbanan.
Oh, good. Right. Because one of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to follow the Rabbanan. That's right. That's one of the mitzvahs. It's right, because it means why? Why did the Torah tell you? Did the Rabbanan make, for example, did the Rabbanan make up the rule, the law? Because why? Because they thought it logical? They thought it productive? No, because fundamentally they saw that the natural law of what they're talking about can be extended. It's an extension of the natural law itself, and that's why the Torah says to you that you're mechuyev to listen to the Rabbanan. And in a certain way, if you do not listen to the laws of the Rabbanan, you're over love. You take a sin. So therefore, the question is, how could you make a sin on a conventional law? If it doesn't occur in reality, why is it a sin? Because it does occur in reality. When you transgress a Rabbanan, you're not simply transgressing a piece of advice. When the Rabbanan say something, they're not simply giving you a piece of advice, a suggestion. The Rabbanan are not suggestions. They're extensions of the natural law itself. So therefore, God says you have to listen to them. And if you don't listen to them, that itself is a transgression. That itself has a reality. That itself is a phenomena, an event. Good. So therefore, we see where the Rabbanan take their power from. Their power is not that they were smarter than us in that way, but they had access in some way to the natural law behind all halachas. So they knew where and when to extend these natural laws and where not to. They had that koyach. But the question is, when did that koyach end? So that's the question of where the Rabbanan ends. So the general answer is, it ended at the end of the Chasimus Talmud. When the Talmud was finished in the 4th century ACE, that was the end of the Amoraim. There were no more Amoraim. After that was the period of Goyim. Well, did the Goyim have that? Could the Goyim at that time misaken a certain halacha that had the equivalent power as a Rabbanan? Well, that's a very big shaila. And did the Rishonim have? Could a Rishon come up with a new halacha? Could he come up with an extension of a halacha? You know what I mean? Does he have that power? And what about the power of minhag? Because there are different authoritarian levels of halacha. There's a deraisa from the Torah. There's a Rabbanan from the Rabbanan themselves, the sages. And then there's something called minhagim, customs. Do customs have a natural law or conventional law? And then finally, there's chumas, specific behaviors that you do on your own that have nothing to do with what you have to do, and so on. So the question, when is a chumah a part of a natural law or not? You see, we don't learn Torah that way. We are absolutely ignorant fundamentally on the authoritarian level of what the halacha is. But that authoritarian level is extremely important, because that tells me the origin of the law. Is it natural or is it a convention? So this is the way halacha has to really be taught, but it's not taught that way, really. It's just taught as a conglomeration of thousands of laws that you have to learn, and you don't know really where they come from. Because there are minhagim between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Well, are these minhagim natural or they're conventional? Were they created by man or they're created by God? And every one of these questions has to be answered to have a true, intelligent understanding. But that's something very important. But clearly, the Rabbanan is natural law. And we see this because of the mitzvah that you have to, that you have to listen to the Rabbanan. Any other questions?
Yeah, Reb Shimon, did Adam Rishon have the ability to analyze this dimension of reality, the ruchnistic dimension of reality, even though he didn't get to the nun?
No, in a certain level he didn't, because he didn't have the nun, and the ability to truly understand, this was not given to Adam Rishon, although he had a higher level of understanding than we do. Because why?
Right.
Because he was ruchnius. Adam Rishon,
right,
even though he was a human being and he was in Gan Eden, which is physical, he was a spiritual being. Because the Gan Eden of today is ruchnius. So obviously he had a deeper understanding than we do. But can I say that he really understood the reason for this? Well, not really, because he was not zocher to the nun. He was supposed to be zocher to the nun because he was the Mashiach. Like it says, Adam, Aleph, Daled is David, Mashiach. He was the Mashiach because the Zulasa is the Mashiach ben David, not the Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. But he didn't have that koyach. but obviously he had a much greater koyach than us because he was much more spiritual than we were.
Means he was able to see that reality, but didn't know the exact causes of it. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Very good.
To some extent.
To some extent, right? Because he had ability to see spiritual the same way to see physical, but he wasn't
Right.
on the exact mechanism of it.
Right. He didn't have the depth of that.
Mm-hmm. So the initial level when Mashiach will come, we won't get to Adam Rishon Koydem Achet right away. It'll be gradual. First, we'll start looking at him.
Well, Adam Rishon didn't get to any level of Nun Sha'arei Bina. That the first time mankind reached that level was with Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef. Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef was the first Mashiach. I mean, he was the first one who had access to the 50th gate. If you don't have access to the 50th gate, you are not Mashiach. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu technically was not Mashiach in a way, because he never got to the 50th gate. God said to him, go down. Go down from where? From the mountain? No. He said, go down from your Madrega. You were supposed to be the Mashiach, but now you will not be the Mashiach because of that and so on. And so because you are not Zocher to the 50th gate. But there's a slight exception with Moshe Rabbeinu, which I'll tell you, which I never said before. On a certain level, even though Moshe Rabbeinu was not the Mashiach, because he never reached the 50th level, because the first tablets that were given were the Messianic tablets, were the gates, 50th gate. But he himself did not become it, so all he could do was take the tablets down. All he could do was take the tablets down and break them and insert them into the second tablet. Okay, but on a certain level, he was like a Mashiach. He was like a Chatzi Mashiach. How do I know that? Because the Ari says that even though Moshe Rabbeinu was not Zocher to the Nun, to the 50th gate, while he was alive, he was Zocher to it after he died. How do we know? Because it says he was buried in Har Nevo. That was the name of the mountain in which he was buried. If you take the word Nevo and divide it into two, it comes out the word Nun Ba. Nun Ba. What does that mean in Hebrew? The 50th has come. And what does that mean? That tells us, the Ari tells us that after he died, he got the 50th gate. He started to get the beginning of the 50th gate. So therefore, he was not Zocher to have it while he was alive. So therefore, was he Mashiach or not? Well, since he was only Zocher to have the 50th gate after he died, he was obviously not the Mashiach, because the godless of the Mashiach is he gets the 50th gate even while he's physically alive. So how do I know that he reached the level which was semi-messianic? And the Baruch Hashem does consider him a shtik Mashiach, because when the Mashiach, two Mashiachs come in the end, the Mashiach ben David and the Mashiach ben Yosef, Chal says Gimel Yovoi, that the three of them will come. Well, there's only two Mashiachs, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef. So what does that mean? Who's the third one? So the third one is Moshe Rabbeinu, because even though he was not a full-fledged Mashiach, but he had a certain messianic koyach. So the question is, the Ramchal does not say, he just says that's what it is, and that's taka what it is. But how do we see this? That Moshe Rabbeinu was a Chatzi Mashiach. How do I know this to be true?
Because Rabbi Akiva was jealous of him. Rabbi Akiva, he said it's all Halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
What's that? So how does that show it?
He was darshaning the Pagan, the Nun, and they asked him, where'd you get this? He said, I got it from Moshe Rabbeinu.
Well, yeah, because Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah, so therefore he constructed the Torah with all the letters, and some letters contain Pagan. That's all he said. Where do you see anything else? Okay, I'll tell you where I think so. And in a way, you mentioned something which was true, but you really don't know you're not realizing what you're saying. When Moshe Rabbeinu turned to the Rebbeinu Shalom and said, you have such a man like Rabbi Akiba, who obviously is on a Messianic level, and I'm not. Why do you give me the Torah? In other words, why don't you let Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef, why wasn't he the Moshe Rabbeinu of Klal Yisrael? You know, because obviously he's on the Madrega to be a Mashiach and to receive the 50th gate. So why wasn't he the one? So God said to him a very interesting thing. Do you remember what God said to him? What God said to him. Okay. What God said to him was the following. The reason why you are still not, you are of a messianic quality. Why? Because the laws, from you come the halachas l'Moshe Sinai. In other words, Rabbi Akiba alone cannot figure out the laws that are Moshe Sinai, because these laws are not part of what was written. These laws are part of the Messiah, and they're directly a Messiah from you. You are the authors, or really, you are the representative who reveals the halachas l'Moshe Sinai. What does that mean? What exactly are the halachas l'Moshe Sinai? Well, there's something you have to understand, you probably don't know. Every law of the Taryag Mitzvahs, every part and every law is contained in the Torah Shabbat, in the written law. It is. Through the Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 hermeneutic principles like Kavah Chomer, Gezerah Shava, you can actually replicate or produce every halacha in the Torah of the Taryag Mitzvahs from those 13 principles. That's right. You just don't know how to do it. You do not know how to do it. But technically speaking, every halacha of the Taryag Mitzvahs, every detail of the Taryag Mitzvahs can be learned, from the Yud Gimel Midas and so on. That's why you find in the Gemara that's so preoccupied with always asking the question, Minolon, how do we know this? What is the principle that tells us this? And they're either always talking about a Kavah Chomer, or they also talk about a Gezerah Shava, or Shnei Ksub Magbon Mekechad. They're always referring to the hermeneutic principles, the principles in which the Torah is derived. Why? Because the fact is that every halacha, every detail of the Taryag Mitzvahs can be replicated, reproduced from one of these principles. How? We don't know, but they can. Except a certain category that cannot be replicated from these principles of drasha. What halachas are those? The halachas l'Moshe Sinai. In other words, even if you use all these principles, there is no principle that will allow you to understand the halachas that come from these, that don't come from them, because the category of halacha l'Moshe Sinai come directly from Moshe Rabbeinu himself. It is a direct Messiah from God to Moshe, and Moshe to Klal Yisrael. It's not that the whole Messiah does not come through the Yud Gimel Midas Shator and the Drashas. Do you understand that? It only comes directly from Moshe Rabbeinu. Now the question is how? What do you mean? Where does it come from then? If it doesn't come from the hermeneutic principles, if it's not from the midas that the Torah is doubting from, so where could it come from? That's the question.
The Rabbi directly gave it to Moshe.
How? What do you mean he gave it to him directly?
He told, weren't these things, aspects, halachas that he got directly from God and then transmitted?
But the whole Torah is based on a Messiah, and this Messiah comes from a person. Yet the category of halachas to Moshe Messiah comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. It's like a complete exception and so on. It's not that simple. But I'll tell you why I think so. And it's a very deep concept. What's the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Mashiach in terms of what they know? In other words, the Mashiach knows the 50th gate. He knows the 50th gate. He will be able to darshan the whole Kol Torah Kula from the 50th gate. And it will be a completely different understanding. Where does he get that from? Because there's no Messiah. You see, there's a very big problem. The whole concept of the Torah is a Messiah. It's coming from somebody before you. And that's where it comes from. And the ultimate person it came from was Moshe Rabbeinu. So it comes from God to Moshe, and to Moshe to the rest of Klal Yisrael. But that's a Messiah. But the 50th gate is not a Messiah. You know what I mean? It's not a true Messiah in a certain sense. Because it comes from the Mashiach. So where does the Mashiach get this from? How does he know this from? You know what I mean? There's no place in the Torah which tells us what the Messiah of the Mashiach is. All it says is Hine Yaskalavdi v'Yom v'Nosav v'Gava Miyoid. That's the pasuk in Yeshaya in Parshas in Perek Nun Gimel, pasuk Beis. That's all it is. And what does it say? It says that the Mashiach, the Mashiachin, two of them, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, what is the level of their knowledge? So it uses the word Hine Yaskalavdi. The word Haskalah means knowledge or das or understanding. And it says the Mashiach will understand. That's it. He doesn't have a Messiah. That's what it says. Hine Yaskalavdi. And the Mashiach himself has it through Haskalah. He just knows it. And therefore, on the first level, the Mashiach will be greater than Avraham Avinu. That's what it says. V'Yoram Avraham Avinu. On the second level, through his Haskalah, the Mashiach will be greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And then it says the Mashiach also has knowledge on the third level. So, what can you know that what?
He has the aura.
That's beyond Moshe Rabbeinu. So the answer is, he will, the Medrash, the Tanchuma says, the Malachai Ashoris, that what the Mashiach will know through Haskalah. He knows what's Haskalah? Logic. He will understand the penimius, the inner soul of something logically. I mean, how will he do it? I don't know. But he will grasp it so that his knowledge of Torah will be greater than the Malachim. The Mashiach will know more while he's alive physically than all the Malachei HaShoros. All of them. That's astounding. He is greater than Avraham Avinu. He is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And he's greater than the Malachei HaShoros. It means he knows more than any other human being alive. So the question is, how does he know this? What's his Messiah? And the answer is Haskalah. When it says Haskalah, it's different than Nevuah. Because Nevuah is when you know something from God. In other words, it's told to you by Nevuah from God. Haskalah, which is the way the Mashiach knows things, he knows things how? He knows things from the Shekhinah, which is the ultimate representative of God. In other words, the Shekhinah is in direct contact with the Mashiach. Direct. It means there is no Messiah. There is no human Messiah that it's an intermediary between the Mashiach and his knowledge. You have to understand what I'm saying. I'm saying something very profound. That there's a certain type of Messiah which has never existed before. Normally, the Messiah that we have comes from what? Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the ultimate one. And Moshe Rabbeinu, through Nevuah, was able to see all of this from God. So therefore, the Messiah that we have is God gives Moshe Rabbeinu through Nevuah the Torah, and then Moshe Rabbeinu as a human being then duplicates, repeats this thing over to all the Doros. But the Mashiach, where's his Messiah from? It says that the Messiah of the Mashiach is directly from God, but not through Nevuah. It's from God. It's higher than Nevuah. And such a Messiah has never happened before. It never happened and never will happen. The Messiah that the Mashiach has does not come from a human being at all. It comes directly from the Shekhinah itself. Now, what's that Madrega? We have no idea. But Moshe Rabbeinu had this Madrega slightly. And that's what God was saying to him. Because you have the ability to know things that will not be carried over by a human. In other words, the Shekhinah will be able to give you certain halachas that will never be known by human, because they are not recorded in the Torah at all. So therefore, the halachas from Moshe Sinai, those halachas that come only from Moshe Rabbeinu, are not in the Torah. But it says, turn it around, everything is in the Torah. But that's not true. Everything is not in the Torah, and all the madrigas of the Yud Gimel Midas and all the drushes that the drushes do not contain the halachas of Moshe Sinai. So where does it come from? The halachas of Moshe Sinai come directly from Moshe Rabbeinu, and where does he get it? He gets it directly from the Shekhinah, not through Nevuah. You know, it's very possible, and I don't know if this is true, but it's very possible that his knowledge of the halachas of Moshe Sinai come from a certain madrega, which is similar to the Mashiachin. They come from Haskalah. You know, wow. So therefore, to Haskalah. Now, what exactly is that level? I don't know. What level? But there seems to be a level that's beyond Nevuah. It's the Torah of the Nun Sharebina. And that Torah comes through Haskalah, not through Nevuah, because there's no Messiah to the Mashiach. So therefore, it comes from Haskalah. And that's the ability to know certain things that Nevuah can't even tell you. And that's why he's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was subject to Nevuah and not Haskalah. But Moshe Rabbeinu himself had this Yisoid. It was he himself also had a slight amount of that. He also created a category of the halachas from Sinai, which seems to have come from Haskalah. So in a certain way, Moshe Rabbeinu did capture at least the essence of the Messianic light to some extent. Even though he had a very minor view of it, he only captured it to some extent, but he did capture it. That's why even Moshe Rabbeinu still has the touch of a Mashiach because of the halacha. So that's what, please, let me finish. So that's what God said to him. Even though you're jealous of Rabbi Akiba because he is the actual Mashiach and he is completely imbued with the concept, the process of Haskalah, and therefore he knows everything that he knows, the whole 50th gate, without even learning it from money. See, the Mashiach, the strange thing about the Mashiach, what it says in the Yaskiladi, that in a certain sense the Mashiach does not have a Rebbe. That's what it means. Every Gadol and everyone in Klal Yisrael had a Rebbe. The only one who did not have a Rebbe was Moshe Rabbeinu. But even he had a Rebbe. His Rebbe was God. I mean, through a process called Nevuah. But the Mashiach does not even have a Rebbe from God through Nevuah. He has a Rebbe with God through Haskalah. That's why there's no comparison. And in the category of the Halacha Shel Moshe Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu replicates that process only in the category of Halacha Sinai. That's what I think, that he replicated the process which was beyond the Nevuah. He replicated the process of knowing something through Haskalah, which means he not only knew it because God told him, but he could actually figure it out because of his relationship with the Shekhinah. Moshe Rabbeinu had a direct relationship with the Shekhinah. It was direct, which means it was even higher than Nevuah. And from that direct relationship with the Shekhinah was able to give him the information of the halachas l'Moshe Sinai. The only other person who will have a direct relationship with the Shekhinah, which is beyond Nevuah, is the Mashiach himself, the two Mashiachim. And that's why they're the highest of all. But Moshe Rabbeinu still was part of that category. I believe this to be the answer. I mean, I don't have proof of the answer necessarily, but I believe this is the explanation. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was somewhat quelled. He was somewhat tranquil, because he realized that even though God didn't make him the Mashiach itself, because he was supposed to be the Mashiach, but he never became the Mashiach, you see it? So therefore, he had a certain level of disappointment. God said, stop. Don't be too disappointed, because even though you don't have the full level of the Messianic level of the Mashiach, you have a partial level. I have also granted you, even in your life, a partial level of Mashiach through the concept of Haskalah. And therefore, in a certain way, you have reached the ultimate level, the Messianic level.
Shimon, that's a profound definition. Wow.
Yeah.
The one question is that mashman that Gemara that you're quoting in Menachos, that the receiver himself, that Mashiachim themselves, can't get that Haskalah of the Halacha Moshe Sinai. And that was somewhat his Nechama. That even though the Mashiach got deeper into the Nun...
No, what you're saying is incorrect. The Mashiach could get the Halacha Moshe Sinai. You know, the Chiddush was that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to get it. You don't understand. The Chiddush was that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was not a Mashiach, was able to get it. And that's why he was satisfied. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu quelled? Why was he tranquilized by what God said to him about the halachas of Moshe Rabbeinu? Because the Rebbeinu said to her, even though you cannot get the nun, but you can get qualities similar through a similar process, and that's a messianic process. What we really see from this is that the ability to get the halachas Moshe Rabbeinu is part of the messianic process of revelation, which is a direct connection to the Shekhinah itself. It's not an indirect connection to Nevuah.
But the question is, did Moshe Rabbeinu in the Halacha Moshe Mishnah, did he have the Haskalah? Did he understand the deeper meaning behind those halachas that he, or was it that he had the ability to transmit it without?
Well, even if he had, so even if he had the ability, automatically qualified him that he had a touch of the Haskalah of the Mashiach. No, obviously he did not have that ability. You know, even though he was touched with the concept of Haskalah, it was still much higher than what he was. Moshe Rabbeinu is two people. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Navi, he's the greatest Navi of all in that concept, and in that concept, so this tells us of a tremendous chiddush. If you really think about it, that there were two gedorim, there were two hafchonas to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was really two people. In Moshe Rabbeinu's ability to give Klal Yisrael the Torah Shebeksav and to give them the ability of the Messiah, he was in the category of a Navi, and he was in the greatest category of a Navi. But it seems to be possible that in the category of the Halacha Moshe Sinai, he was not in the category of it. He was beyond that. He was in the category of a Mashiach, because he had a different process. It wasn't Nevuah. It wasn't even Nevuah's Moshe. It was Haskalah, which I think, and that he was in the category where he touched the messianic heights. And therefore he was quelled, he was satisfied. That even though he lost the ability to rise up to the new level, what I'm saying is a tremendous chiddush. And what I'm saying is, Moshe, in giving the Torah to Klal Yisrael, was to go on two levels. The first level was the level to give Klal Yisrael the Torah. And the second level was to give Klal Yisrael the Torah, the Tzuras HaKeser, which is the Nun Sharebina. He didn't make that second level, and therefore he never reached that. But he approached that second level to some extent through the halachas of Moshe Sinai, and that's the reason. I've never seen an explanation of why God divided the halachas of Moshe Sinai into a category which has no imprint in the Torah Shebeksav or Torah Shebeksav. In other words, through the normal technique of drasha, the Yud Gimel Midashat, that's it, the drasha of Kabbalah, and so on and so forth, all halachas submit to that categories, except the halachas of the Moshe Sinai. Now, the Torah does not tell us, at least I've never seen it, why. Why are there two different categories in Messiah? And so I'm offering the theory, because that second category of the halachas of Moshe Sinai was not in the category of Nevuah. And Moshe Rabbeinu did not know it through Nevuah. He knew that category through Haskalah. And in that sense, he touched the Nun Sharebina. Not totally, or even partially, but he touched it on some level. So Moshe Rabbeinu became a messianic soul. And why did Moshe Rabbeinu become a messianic soul? Because he was able to get God to forgive Klal Yisrael for the hate of the ego. When the Rebbeinu Shem said to him, Solachti k'dvoracha, I will pardon them according to the way you ask, that is a messianic request. That Moshe Rabbeinu was able to save Klal Yisrael from the din of Misa, which the Rebbeinu Shem originally wanted to give them, that's a messianic category to save them. Because not only he saved the generation of the Midbar, the Dor Midbar, but he's applied that as a principle throughout the rest of human history. That from then on, God said to him, I will pardon them, just like I pardoned them to be able to live, and I pardoned them, and I allowed the messianic light, the Nun Sharabina, to go down to the earth and to go into the second Torah, and I only did that because of your tefillah. And that's a messianic tefillah that's actually able to transform the Nun into a different category. Originally, the Nun was in the Shemayim. It was only in the category of ultimate spirituality. But Moshe Rabbeinu was able to take it down from that category and put it into the Torah that we have. So therefore, in a certain sense, he physicalized it. He made it capable of sojourning in the physical universe. And this itself is a messianic process. So because he was given that power to save Klal Yisrael as a Mashiach, he therefore earned the ability to, on a certain level, be a Mashiach. And how was he a Mashiach? Because he was able to touch the process of what? Of Haskalah, not Nevuah. So therefore we see from this that there were two categories of Moshe Rabbeinu. There's Moshe the Navi, and there's Moshe the Mashiach. And that's I propose this as the answer, that there are two different distinct categories of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Incredible definition.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Okay.
So what does it mean there, Rabbi Akiva, when Moshe went over to him and asked him, how do you know this information? And Rabbi Akiva said, oh, I know it from Halacha Moshe Messianic. So Rabbi Akiva understood he's not.
Wait a minute. Where does the Gemara say that?
I believe that Gemara says Moshe felt bad. And Moshe went over to him and he says, how do you know this stuff? He says, oh, I know this from Halacha Moshe Messianic.
So now this makes sense. It's a shtick raya. That what Rabbi Akiva was saying is, what it means is, I know it from the process in which Moshe Rabbeinu knew it from the Halacha of Moshe Mashiach. Both processes contain Haskalah. That's a shtick raya to what I'm saying. That the process of information given to Moshe Rabbeinu directly from the Shechina, which is the process of Haskalah. He's saying, Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef, that the same way Moshe Rabbeinu knew the Halacha of Moshe Mashiach, which is what? To the process of Haskalah, which is the messianic process of the Torah, I know that also because I am the Mashiach.
And that's that he was Doirish Tagim, and he took the Nun out of the Memtes. What does that mean?
Well, that's what it means. He was able to do it through Haskalah.
But he pulled it out of the Memtes. That means Moshe, when he broke the Luchas, he threw it into the eclipse. He threw the Nun into the eclipse, and Rabbi Akiva pulled it out.
But Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu was able to pull a very small section of the Taryag mitzvahs out of the Klippas. What was that section? Through Haskalah. That section. Oh, right. Do you understand? The whole importance of the Halacha of Moshe Sinai was, I think, that it comes to Haskalah, not Nevuah. And that's why Akiba ben Yosef was referring to that as how he knows what he means. So that's a shtick raya, that in the category of Halacha of Moshe Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu was touched with the messianic light, even though he was alive.
Rabbi Akiva also pulled it out through Haskalah, but he pulled out much more.
Well, he was. Why did he pull out much more?
He was the Mashiach ben Yosef.
Right. Because he was the Mashiach.
But that's
Yeah.
he reached the nun. He reached the nun completely.
Yeah. But you once
comes
said,
out.
Shimon, I don't think it's a theory, but you once said that he actually pulled out the nun from the Mantes through being Dorish Hagen that nobody knows. That's probably the process of Haskalah.
But he pulled it out. He knew how to pull it out. Nobody knows how to pull it out at all. Where did Rabbi Akiba get this information? Where? From the same place that Moshe Rabbeinu got the Halacha Mushinaya. How? Haskalah. Don't you understand? Rabbi Akiba is referring to the process of Haskalah. That's such a process that allows you to pull out Torah, Chedusha Torah, without being part of a Messiah, without even having a Rebbe. So that's what Rabbi Akiba ben Yosef was saying.
Yeah.
I think
somehow is the secret of being Dorish the Hagen, you're saying.
Right. Well, in some way, it seems to be related to the level not of Oisius, of Pagan.
Pagan, wow. You know, there's an Archaim that says what you're saying. Pagan comes from a certain part of the heart that you can't even talk. You can't even talk about it. You have to have an inner knowledge.
Right. That's what Pagan are. Why? Because there are 4 categories: Oisius, letters; Pagan, which is crowns on some of the letters, right? And the next one is what do you call it? Is the Tom, not Tom.
Nekudos, maybe Nekudos.
The next one is Nekudos, vowels, which become the vowels, and then finally Tomim. Because what's the difference between those letters? What's the difference between Tomim, Nekudos, Pagan, and Oisius? What's the relationship of the 4 categories? Well, the relationship is the following. In terms of reading the Torah, when you read it, what do you minimally need to read the Torah? Of these 4 categories, what must you have to read the Torah?
Letters.
The Oisius. What? The Oisius, the letters. Yeah, without letters you can't read. So therefore the letters are the first basic instruments which allow comprehension. What's the next level? Tagen. Well, do you really need the Tagen? No. In other words, Tagen are only useful not from the simple meaning of the Torah, but from the inner meaning of the Torah. So in other words, the Oisius of the Torah is the Chetzonius of the Torah. The Tagen represents the beginning of the penimius of Torah. And the Nekudos and the Ta'omim are higher levels of penimius. So therefore, the Nun Sharebina, which is completely the ability to understand the penimius of Torah, starts with the Tagen. Because they're not even necessary to read the Torah. The only sign that you have to have the letters. Once you have the letters, you basically can read the Torah. So therefore, the beginning of the Torah on a level, which is the Maila Minadin, which is the category of penimius, is Tagen, and then Nekudos, and then Tomim. But that's the relationship of the 4 categories. And that's why the Tagen is the beginning of the category of penimius. You understand?
Wow, yeah. Yeah, the Archaim HaKadosh says this, I never understood what he meant. Yeah.
Well, do you think he means this?
Yeah. Shimon, the way you're saying it now, that could be Pshat in the Gemara Menachos. That he's saying,
yeah,
I got to what Moshe Rabbeinu already put into the Torah. I'm just revealing it. Moshe started it. Right. I'm finishing it. But could be without Moshe,
right.
Rabbi Akiva never could have done what he did. He needed Moshe for Rabbi Akiva to be Rabbi Akiva. That could be maybe a different shot to him back.
Because Rabbi Akiva needed the Oisius And that's that is the chelik of Moshe Rabbeinu. The chelik of Moshe Rabbeinu was of the oisius. That's the chelik, and that can be understood to nevuah. But the category from tagin and up cannot be understood. There's no way to understand the tagin, the kudus, and tomim. The only way to understand it is to understand the penimius. But he needed the category of oisius, which was Moshe Rabbeinu supplied, to allow that to happen, because Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to be the Mashiach. I mean, this is not a joke. He was the Mashiach. He was not the first instance, but he was an actual Mashiach of Klal Yisrael. He was supposed to be the first Mashiach of Klal Yisrael after Avraham Avinu and Noach and so on. But he was supposed to be the first one. But he stopped at that point. He stopped at the Oisius. He couldn't go further. That's why he saw Rabbi Akiba doing the Tagin, and he understood, what is this guy doing? How is he able to understand the Torah from the Bechina of Tagin? He was shocked. But the Rebbeinu Shem said to him, you also have that Bechina. Where do you have that Bechina? Because you know the Halacha of Moshe Mashiach without any Messiah. You don't even have the Messiah. I believe you don't even have the Messiah from Nevuah. Your Messiah comes from the same place that the Mashiach has his Messiah, which is what?
Haskalah.
Which is Haskalah, right? So this all, you see how this all fits in?
Right.
Okay.
This also explains, Shimon, why there was such a battle with the Chachamim and the Tzedukim about Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. They couldn't stand Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. What's the big deal? It looks like they denied the nun.
The penim of the Torah. The penim of the Torah.
Right.
Wow.
Very interesting mitzvahs, Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Nusach HaMayim, Arava. Very interesting.
Yeah.
To reanalyze Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Yeah, Shana Rabbah.
Yeah. So we see that Moshe Rabbeinu as a Navi is on one level, and Moshe Rabbeinu as a Mashiach is on another level. One is through Nevuah, and the other one is through Yaskalavdi. Well, not really, but the Haskalah. The Madrega of the Mashiach in the Nun Sharabina is Haskalah. The Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu as the one who gave us the Torah, the fundamentals of the Torah, is that he was a Navi. Even though he was the greatest Navi of all. These are two distinct Madregas.
Amazing Torah. Wow.
Yes. Okay, I'm stopping now.
But Shimon, on another note, totally unrelated, do you know, is there an eclipse tonight?
Yes. There is.
Full lunar eclipse, I believe.
Oh, there's a lunar eclipse? It's supposed to be called a black moon. I think they're calling it a black moon
again. A black moon? I think they're calling it a blood moon.
Or blood moon? I don't know. Oh, it's a blood moon. I see.
Yeah.
And it says the blood moon is there.
Right? Today's face of
today's face of eclipse. Yeah. And the whole shir that I gave today is what? Is in the schus of the death of Rabbi Akiba, the death of all the students of Rabbi Akiba, and the Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's Yortzeit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm also giving the schus, the Torah is in the schus of my son.
Amen. Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
Next time I'm going to continue on this concept of the Nun Sharabina. I'm going to explain it on even deeper level than you heard now.
Wow. I think the lunar eclipse is going to be very visible. I mean, now that the clouds are opening up.
Oh, yeah?
It's 11 o'clock tonight, yeah.
No, they're saying earlier, East Coast. It
starts when is it on the... there becomes a blood moon by 10 o'clock?
Things right at the beginning of dusk. I just have to look it up. I saw it earlier. I forgot the exact time. Hold on.
Shimon, why do you think it's happening again?
Because Because it's Pesach Sheni. That's a simon of the Gula, the second Gula, which is the final Gula.
Pesach Sheni is more like the Gula Akida?
What's that?
If you're saying Pesach Rishon is more the Gulas Mitzrayim, Pesach Sheni is more the Gula of the Mashiach?
Right. It's the final Gula, because they were Tomei in the thing. So God gave. The only holiday that has a Sheni is Pesach. Why? Because of what I'm saying. That the Rebbeinu Shalom said, you missed it now by Mitzrayim, but I promise you, I will give you another mitzvah that will indicate to you my promise. And what's the imprimatur of that mitzvah? What is that mitzvah telling me that there's a Pesach Sheni? Even though you fail the Gula the first time around, it will happen again. And that time will be the last. That's what Pesach Sheni is.
Sheni is a very high yontif. It's like Purim cotton type of yontif.
Right.
Very high
right.
yontif. Wow.
Right.
Wow. It comes for like to rectify a missed opportunity.
Right. People think that Pesach Sheni is a b'diavad, and it's true. It is a b'diavad, but really it's a haskalah. It's the bracha of Tchias HaMesim.
Wow.
That mankind should never have died. There should be no Misa in the world only because of the hate of other Mauritian. But the bracha of the Rebbeinu Shalom is that he's Mechaya Mesim. Even though mankind has to suffer death, the Rebbeinu Shalom will remove that Oynish, and we will be in the Madreg of other Mauritian Kodim Achet.
Wow, this is such high Torah, Shimon. You're a full Kabbalist now. Wow. Very high Torah. This says anywhere? This is Jeherigish. Wow.
It says it's nowhere.
Wow. Amazing. And a lunar eclipse on that night, is it only good for Klal Yisrael, you're saying?
Yeah, because that's a pasuk, and that was in Micha, I think. That and the moon will turn to blood, and the sun will be hidden, and on that day is the day of that's the great day of the Lord.
Wow.
So
it's in Yoel.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's in Yoel.